Hi, and welcome to our session on passionate schools. My name is Tony Ryan, and I intend to offer you some very practical ideas on how to create inspiration in a school in everyday life. I may as well begin by introducing you to Jake, or more specifically, Jake's right arm. I first met this teacher at a conference. I was sitting beside him when the person who was presenting asked us to turn to someone beside us and convince the other person how much teaching meant to us. So I get to talking with Jake, who is in his second year of teaching. Jake has a tattoo on his right arm. The word is believe. When I asked him why he had this tattoo on his arm, he said, because I believe so much in the teaching profession. I think this guy is an example of the sort of young people we need to get into this profession. He was just an amazing young person, and according to other people on his staff, he was worth having there. So let's talk about the different ways that we can build up a belief in this amazing profession of ours. Just to let you know, I'm going to set up some brief pauses during this session, and I'm going to leave you to respond to those three questions. I love using these questions near the end of a lesson with students. The what basically means, well, what was just said? Or perhaps what were the three key points for you? So what is questioning the relevance of what you heard? Are there implications for your own practice? And the last question is now what? So what are you going to do with it? What's the best option on putting something into practice? So get ready for seeing that slide a few times as well. Now, if we're talking about quality schooling environments, there is no end of research that has been done on that particular topic. And so we would see responses such as those on the screen here to the ways that we create a great school. So definitely the research authenticates quite clearly that those points are very important. However, I'm going to focus more specifically on how you create passion within that quality school. So I pay total respect to those key points there, but I am going to take some of them a little bit further. And in fact, what I will do is this. I'll focus in on these 5 points. And as I go through each one, I'll offer different examples that I have seen in schools around the world and different perspectives in terms of where you can go further with all of these. Now, before I even go further with that, can I let you know that at the end of this session, I'll ask if you can respond to these 4 questions as well, in terms of what you could do overall with what I offer during this time. What could you do? We'll be asking you, what possibly could you do? What are the different options? Consider what they call blue sky thinking and come up with a whole lot of different perspectives on what you could put into place. What will you do categorically asks what you will definitely put into practice. After you've determined that, you then work out the details, the how and whens in terms of putting those points into practice. And then the last question asks you to sustain it, to work out how you are going to keep it going. So that slide will be coming up again near the end. And before I dive into my 5 key points, can I also make this point in terms of the entire system? We need zest within it as well. Perhaps we've just gone a little bit too logical sequential and we need some magic and pizzazz back in it. So can I make these 3 points? The first one is be very careful about teacher-proofing the system. I'm seeing more and more units being written and more processes being put into place that don't seem to trust teachers to be amazing. It's almost as though some people don't believe in them being able to do the work properly. On the contrary, we need systems that deeply trust teachers to be amazing because the vast majority of them are. We also need to do a Finland. If you go to a Saturday night party in Finland and someone asks you what you do and you say you're a teacher, they basically are in awe of you. We need to have that same approach in every other country on the planet. We need to have pride in the profession. That means we talk it up ourselves. I am very uneasy with anyone in the education system who ever disparages it from within. As I bluntly say, even birds do not crap in their own nests, and we need to be the same. We must talk it up. Education has some enemies outside the profession, in some parts of the media. We must not give them fuel for their fire. So talk it up yourself. And it's a very obvious point, but we have to do whatever we can to find the most amazing people to become teachers. After all, we need teachers in front of young people who are inspired about life so that they model what it means to be an incredible adult. Otherwise, these young people are looking at them and saying, is that what it's like to be a grown up? And if it's not someone who is outstanding in what they do, these young people are going to start thinking, well, why bother? So we must have wonderful models for them. So we must find the best and the brightest whenever we possibly can. So let's dive in here. The first point, it's a pretty obvious one, but it's how to generate daily energy and zest in a school. And I see so many great things being done in different education establishments. One is to have some sort of daily welcome committee. I was working in a school once where one of the deputy principals would stand outside for about half an hour before the start of school, and he would welcome basically anyone into the school environment. So when the buses pulled up and these children climbed off, he would be calling out by name and saying, "Joshua, love the work you did yesterday." And Josh would probably be trying to run and hide, but at the very least, he was doing whatever he could to start things off on a really positive note. He'd do the same with parents, the same with teachers. I reckon we need to pay someone who stands at the school gates where teachers drive in every morning. And what has to happen is this. Every teacher has to wind down their car window, and that person at the gate will then say something amazing to them like, "Love your hairdo," or "I think that program you're doing is just incredible," just to pick them up a little bit. There is some research that would indicate that the first 5 minutes of your day can make or break it. So it's really important to make it a reasonably affirming one. Another point in terms of zest in schools, we need to inject some sort of inspiration into assemblies. I'm going to blow a fuse the next time that I hear a really boring assembly where people just drone on forever and the last thing that they're doing is modeling that they are inspired by life and learning. I was in a school once where they had a parent who came in and did a magic show for 10 minutes. Now, certainly after that, the teachers needed to calm the kids down for a couple of minutes. However, it was the most wonderful way to start a day. I'm just thinking to myself, we need more magic in schools, and it was just a wonderful thing for that school to do. We also need to have some interesting rituals or activities that happen consistently. I was in another school once where the principal used to hire a masseur who would come in every couple of weeks and spend a lunchtime just massaging people's shoulders because I was so tired after all the hard work they've been doing for the last few days. You know, it was just a different ritual, but it was a wonderful one. Or the way that some people do their drink sessions on Friday afternoon and they adulate different people for things they've done during the week. What about doing a student or a teacher of the week program? The student of the week program is where it's done at random. So, for example, you do not have assemblies where you just give certificates out to the top 10% who only ever work perfectly and do the best productive work. It's a totally random thing. So in a classroom, if it's in primary or in secondary as well, if you have a form class, you place all the names into a box, students' names into a box. And each Monday, you choose a name at random. And for that week, everyone in the group has to adulate that person. They get to be first in line if they wish, and they get all sorts of other dispensations for different things. Now, the variation on that is to have a teacher of the week. So, again, at random, a name is chosen on a Monday morning, and for the rest of that week, that person receives all sorts of preferential treatment. They get occasional relief from duties. They find chocolates in their pigeonholes. People do everything they can to help them to feel fantastic. So there's another thought. And here's one more. There is a lot to be said for finishing the day as well as you possibly can. It's not a good thing for anyone in that school to walk out of it feeling despondent and downcast because of what happened that day. We need to finish it really well. So, for example, in classrooms, I believe that the last class of the day in secondary and simply the end of the time in primary needs to finish off with everyone debriefing in terms of what was really productive for them that day. What worked well for them? What did they actually learn that they didn't know before? And when they go home and their parents say, "What did you do today?" at least they'll have something to say instead of nothing. So finish off the day as well as you can. Have free chocolates or hot chocolate or whatever for teachers as they walk into the staff room before they go. Look for things that finish things off well. Keeping that in mind, it's really important that we celebrate successes. I'm finding people so busy in education now that it's almost as though they brush over the great things they do. Now and again, we just need to make sure that we affirm what's going on. So we need processes for a start that do monitor those successes. Some sort of dob-in where consistently they're written up somewhere so people know what's going on. And we also need to acknowledge them as soon as possible. It's all very well to do it at a speech night at the end of the year. However, it needs to be done that same day whenever it possibly can. So learn to celebrate the good things you do rather than being drowned out by the occasional poor things that might take you out. Take this into account. Last year, this gentleman finished off his blog called 1000 Awesome Things, and he had been doing it for 3 years. So each day he had put out a blog just to remind people of a single awesome thing that happens in everyday life, such as, for example, climbing into clean sheets in your bed at night after you've washed them during the day, or driving over the top of a hill and feeling your body lift up a little bit as you go over the other side. Most of them were just outright funny, but I love the way that he reminded us of good things. Maybe we need to have 100 awesome things in our school and put up the list and get the students to brainstorm them. I know a primary school teacher who did that with her class. She asked them to come up with the 100 awesome things in 10-year-olds' lives. And they had the most wonderful stuff. The smell of a bakery in the early morning as they were being driven to school. Believe me, there are lots of things you can come up with when you make the effort. So 100 or even 1,000 awesome things could be a great idea. I love the funtheory.com. If you enjoy really interesting videos, it's worth having a look at these. They basically look for fun things in life and they interpret it in this way. They look for the problem, but they come up with a humorous way of responding to it. I think maybe we need to do this more in schools so that we have students who are roaming around looking for issues, but then coming up with a really funny way of resolving it. One of my favorites was with this one is the speed camera lottery. Basically, if you are when you're not speeding, your photo is taken. When you're not speeding, and all of those number plates get put into a drawer every so often, and the number plate that comes out wins a lot of money. And in fact, all of that is paid for by the people who did speed. It's just a lovely, beautiful, different twist to the way things can be done. But it's a sort of energy I want to see in schools when they're doing, really interesting things. Dan Pink comes up with some beautiful material in terms of motivation. It's worth keeping in mind his 3 key points in terms of how we create motivation in us. I need to ask this in terms of school. How much autonomy is there for everyone who is in that school, whether it's a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 52-year-old? Do they have that capacity to really direct what they can do themselves? Mastery must be clear in a school. After all, that's pretty well what they're about. But with this, it's your desire to actually improve at something and to feel pride in doing so. And also to have purpose. It's having something that is greater than yourself that actually drives you each day. In fact, if we have teachers who are in schools and their primary purpose in life is to make that difference in young people's lives, then we're pretty well going to have that passion at school, no matter what else we do. So keep in mind his 3 points in terms of this. Here's a lovely, simple idea in terms of putting that together. Basically, it's to have a snag every so often. I sometimes begin staff meetings by using a snag where people have to simply come up with something that was new and good in their day. New means it was for the first time, it was fresh, it was different. Good means that it was positive, it wasn't a negative. So think about how you could do a snag every so often. Here's my second point. I believe that the passionate schools are the ones where teachers are passionate about their own lives. It is not possible to be inspiring outside the school and then not inside, or vice versa. Something is non-authentic there. So people need to organize their personal lives so that they've got the energy to be amazing when they actually come to school. There are many different ways of getting organized. I'm sure that anyone listening to this has already worked out their own systems. The dilemma is most of us know what to do. The question is whether we actually do it or not. One perspective on this is that it's important to future-proof your own life. It's a little new age-ish, however, there is a lot to be said for the concept of future-proofing. It essentially means that you set yourself up against anything that is going to happen in the rest of your life. Being physically fit is an obvious point. Having perhaps 3 months financial backup in case something goes badly astray is worthwhile doing. Obviously, keeping quality relationships going is going to make a huge difference to your life. And of course, being a learner yourself is critical. After all, it's hypocritical to be in the education profession and to not be a learner yourself. So you have to be into learning as much as you can. Perhaps even working out your own wellness is important here. That first question is critical when it comes to your own health. Whatever age you are, my challenge to you is to look around at other people your own age and work out if you're fitter and healthier. Now, obviously, you don't wish them badly in any way. The reality is that you need to be better than your age group. You also need to contend with the concept of anger. Being angry consistently in your life is the single biggest indicator of a premature heart attack. Get over being angry, especially when you work with children. Upfront question: where do you in fact find inspiration in your life, and or who inspires you? Is it sunsets or 3-year-olds laughing, or seeing a student who achieves something past, partly as a result of your support for them? Look for what inspires you and learn to experience that as often as you possibly can. Given the question about people inspiring you, the Jewish tradition have a beautiful concept known as Lamed Vav. It literally translates as the number 36. And according to this tradition, at any one time on the planet, there are 36 people alive who are the ultimate model in how to be an amazing human being. They are humble, they're dignified, and yet they've got this capacity to support others in the most amazing way. So the question is, who do you know who is a Lamed Vav? And by the way, one of the rules of this tradition is that if you think you are one of them, you automatically are not, because you don't have the humility to be one. So just have a think sometime about those wonderful people who can be a model to you in terms of how to live with deep wellness and spirit. Teacher wellness, I believe, is critical to good classroom practice. It is not easy to be an exemplary teacher when you have a whole lot of other things imposing upon you from the outside, whether it's your physical health or mental well-being or even your spiritual well-being. Now, its core, the dilemma is that there is so much changing so rapidly that it's making it difficult to, in fact, feel wellness in teaching today. Something like 90% of all the content that has been created on this planet through human history has been developed in the past 3 years. And as a result, teachers sometimes feel overwhelmed with this. The corollary to this is that those changes are going to also help us to make the most amazing and wonderful improvements. When it comes to something like learning analytics and personalized learning, we will see some wonderful quantum improvements in learning over the next 10 years. So one of the big issues with this is that we need to reframe how we look at time management and getting the best possible things done. One is this: I believe that too many people are trying to solve issues around this time today using earlier processes from perhaps 30 years ago. Here's an example. Way back in the 1990s, when someone had to do an extra project, they just put in more time for it, which usually meant weekends. So if they had to write an entire new project or unit, they'd spend another 2 weekends on it. Well, that's all well and good, except it cuts into personal time, of course. And the dilemma today is that there is no more time available for anyone. More and more people are doing more, and systems require more with less. So as a result, they're overwhelmed. We need to think differently. We cannot just keep putting in endless weekends and holiday time to do things. An example of thinking differently is to crowdsource. Actually connect with other people. Find out someone else who's already done it and then connect with them. There are many other ways of rethinking how you find that energy to keep yourself going. Part of crowdsourcing is actually learning how to search online. One of my challenges to you would be this: I believe, save you at least 20 hours of professional time each year simply by putting in 1 hour of intensive research on something. Now, surely you'd be interested if you knew that 1 hour could save you 20. I'll presume that you would be. So here is the hour. Simply learn how to search online properly. Very few people do indeed search properly online. They just mess around hoping to find what they're after. Instead, learn how to search effectively. And a third thought in terms of time management is to keep thinking in terms of solution. In psychology, they refer to it as solution-focused therapy. Whenever you have an issue, the idea is to brainstorm what can be done about it. Now, I see some amazing teachers who do this with students with comments like "ask 3 before me," or they have to come up to the teacher with a solution rather than the problem. So bluntly, be careful about letting students complain to you about something. Get them to come up to you by describing the problem, but by then telling you 2 or 3 viable and worthwhile solutions to something. Some principals also do this with teachers. There is a lot to be said for it, because then the teachers have to start thinking about what can be done rather than simply dumping it on someone else to do it for them. Now, when it comes to solution finding, it works something like this. You can write down the problem on the left-hand side, but then you just keep coming up with solutions. I often hear teachers saying they can't keep up with new technologies. We can all understand that one. Why don't you find a 10 or a 14-year-old coach? Pay them $5 an hour. Okay, set up your own learning networks. Find someone else who knows how to do it, and then you can trade them some skill you have that they don't have. The one about breaking down every time. Oh, yes, okay. Yes, it can sometimes break down. Everyone knows that. But work at your plan B and plan C. Be careful about downloading video directly during a lesson. I reckon you're asking for trouble when you do that. If at all possible, you need to record it so you can play it back on your device. Something like having too much to do. Well, I've already been indicating that. Instead, break tasks into smaller pieces and work out some decent tools on your mobile. There are many apps around that can support you in terms of organizing your time. I often hear people complaining that their students know more than them. Well, I have to say, pretty well get over it. Work on your ego. Of course, some of them are going to know more than you. Instead, work out how to harness those skills of theirs. More and more, I'm seeing teachers who have student consultants in their classroom, and they're tech consultants. And they're the ones they go to anytime someone needs some support. Or even the one about this tech stuff isn't for me. If that's your problem, I think it's also a big one for you. I think you're going to have to rethink what it means to actually be involved in teaching, because it's not going away. It is simply another good tool that can be used to improve learning. So problem and solution. Keep thinking solution whenever you can. I've always chuckled about the concept of FOMO. I actually believe that the perfectionists I see in teaching are too much into FOMO. They have a fear of missing out. They're worried that they'll just miss one single thing that is new in the world. And so instead, they just stay up forever. They're always the person who's last to leave a party in case they miss seeing something that everyone else heard about, who will then see it later on Facebook. In fact, I would prefer to make use of JOMO, in case you haven't heard of it before. It stands for joy of missing out. Here's the reality. You can't do everything. So you have a go at doing a few things well. Because you can't do everything, you need to feel peace with that sometimes. Turn off your phone on a Sunday for a few hours and go and hug a tree. Go walk through a park. Sit there and read a book. Actually feel the joy of missing out and the peace that goes with that as well. Just a different thought. If you're that serious about getting yourself organized, here is an overview in terms of what can be done. There are 6 dimensions to most people's lives, at least in the Western world. Physical is your health and well-being, your nutrition, what you eat and drink. Social is your connection with others, family, friends, acquaintances. Mental is your well-being psychologically, how you look after your thinking. What do you think about all day long? Professional, of course, is how much you advance yourself in terms of your particular craft. Financial is a reality. Too many people go, oh, money is evil. I don't want to know about it. Well, actually, money's not evil. The greed for money is evil. Pay respect to it and learn how to plan to have a reasonable amount. Spiritual, of course, can mean many things to many different people. In part, I see it as the depth and substance to everyday life. So, and it's a passion for things. So you have those 6 dimensions. Now, have a go sometime at just writing out these sections for each one of those. Remind yourself of what you already do well. Then write down perhaps one further option you can do. And then write down the first step for doing that. And also determine the success indicators that would show that up to a point, or even comprehensively, you've managed to actually make that happen. Time for these 3 questions. What? So what? Now what? If you have any time at all, please pause for a few minutes and go through those 3 questions. Now come to the next point. Becoming an outstanding teacher. Now, here is the reality. If a school is full of inspiring teachers who do what they can to live a balanced life and yet give exemplary effort in the classroom, it's a guarantee that that school is going to be a passionate school. We all know this. That is not rocket science. However, becoming an outstanding teacher is another matter altogether. Let's start with this one. I believe that the really great schools are the ones who focus equally on these 2 concepts. Most people have heard of the pedagogy, the art and science of learning for 4 to 18-year-olds. Not as many have heard of andragogy. That's the art and science of learning for adults. We need to focus on these equally in great schools, and yet too often it's just predominantly the first one. So focus on both the students and the teachers. And I don't mean 3 professional development days a year in the andragogy either. I'm talking every day, constantly fine-tuning how well we do. Keep in mind that adults don't just learn by doing something, they learn by reflecting on it. And one of the dilemmas in schools is finding the time for people to do quality reflection. Keep in mind also the difference between poor and good teaching, even in a single year, can be an extra year of student improvement. At first, that sounds simply nonsensical until you have a good look at this. A poor teacher may only get 6 months worth of work done in a year. They keep getting sidetracked by small behavior issues. They don't have their head properly around the work that they're going to do, and they only perhaps get through around 6 months of work. An amazing teacher can get through up to 18 months of work in a year. 6 months to 18 months, 12 months, a whole difference in a single year. It is just too important for us not to focus in on amazing teaching. Here's one way of doing it. Essentially, to create a new culture of learning, and especially in our schools. And it's where every teacher wants to find out the best possible way of doing things consistently. A lovely little book that is a small one and worth a read, and they're essentially saying this: stop complaining about constant change. It's going to be with us forever. Instead, don't fight it, but embrace it. See it as an opportunity to become an even more amazing person who just loves, who just exhilarates in finding out new things and different ways of doing things in life. According to this book, there are some principles of this new culture of learning. And, they're pretty obvious. The old ways of just standard dissemination can't keep up with this rapidly changing world. And there is much more peer-to-peer learning happening now. And I will come back to that at other times. So very important to embrace the change and not fight it. That comes through especially with the concept of technology. Now remember, technology is only a tool. It's not the master. However, it can be a great tool or a poor tool depending on how it's used. The reality is this: we have to take that on board. As a teacher, we must learn how to make use of these various technologies. Now, keep in mind that used badly, they can impede learning and make it worse than if you do no technology at all. However, used well, the research is now longitudinal enough to demonstrate it categorically can improve the learning. Here's a reality. This technology won't replace teachers anytime soon. Though somewhere up ahead, something is going to start to change because governments and others who impose from top down are going to keep wanting more with less. And if they can work out how to use technology in terms of rather than a percentage of teachers, they're probably going to seriously consider it. I can see within 5 years where we can consider the use of global teachers who can sometimes teach into hundreds and even thousands of students in second and third world countries. So there are going to be a lot of different changes coming through. You have to make sure that you know how to use it as well as possible. There is good news and bad news with all of this, of course. The good news is that not all, but most young people know how to use the technologies. The bad news is they rarely know how to use it for their learning. They basically know how to stir their friends with it and take videos of their pet cat doing strange things and putting it onto YouTube, but they don't often know how to use it for their learning. So the good news is that they would need you to help them with that. The bad news is that you've got to stay updated as often as possible. The good news is there are plenty of ways of doing that. The bad news, of course, is that it takes up time and energy, and that's a balance that we all have in our own lives. Here are some different ways in terms of trying to keep up. It seems like teachers are doing the PD for schools. It's where we create the teacher's capacity to do it themselves rather than relying on outsiders all the time. Because outsiders can only come in occasionally and they may not understand the culture in a school. The teachers know it themselves. I've been into schools where they in fact pay teachers for running the sessions for other teachers. Seriously considering your school as some sort of university or center of excellence in teacher education. More and more schools I find are doing this sort of thing, and they're almost transposing the concept of a university into their own establishment. And they may even have a full-time person, a director of learning or something similar, who actually directly helps others to be great learners. Why not consider running more of your own conferences? Perhaps even set up your own TEDx event. Some people seem to think that that's just for the business or outside world. In fact, you can run a TEDx event in your own lounge room as long as you use their various signage and you do the videoing properly and you submit it to them. So why don't you consider running one yourself? Have a look at Teach Meet sessions around the world. They're fantastic. They've just got everyday full-time teachers who support each other with what they're doing. When it comes to sessions in schools, can I encourage you to look for sessions before school rather than after? Yes, it can be a little onerous to get there a bit earlier than normal, perhaps 7:45 for a 9 o'clock start, though I find teachers on average get at least twice as much work done in that hour before as they do in 2 hours afterwards because most people are brain dead by then. Perhaps in schools where you can even set up a time trade-off for attendance. I worked in a school once that had 2 hour sessions consistently after school, but after a teacher had attended three of them, she or he could take a day off. Perhaps a thought. And even just a very sustainable focus in terms of how well you are teaching. So, for example, needing to have a video camera put on you by yourself every 2 to 3 weeks so that you are watching clearly to see how you are improving. We do this in other fields such as sport. We need to do the same with teaching as well. So work out how you sustain it so you clearly know you're improving over a period of time. You might consider the use of inquiry for the learning of the teachers in the school as compared to just the students. Now, there are many different frameworks for inquiry. There could be something to be said for using one like this. You start by asking, what's the purpose of doing what we're going to do in terms of our own learning? And it could be a focus on the use of iPads, for example, but you need to clarify the purpose. Then you work out what you're already doing about this particular topic. What's the prior knowledge that we have here? Who else do we know who is doing this well? Then you work out the questions you need to ask, and that can often be the critical component to this whole process. After that, you work out the learning steps you'll take in responding to those questions. You then might determine how you do further worthwhile research. Keep in mind that research is not spelled Google. Work out different practical ways of doing that research. Basically, find people who've already done it. And then work out how you're going to put it into place and or share the findings. There is a lot to be said for clarifying that before you even start in terms of what you're going to do. In terms of quality learning, you may be a fan of John Hattie's. I think there is some merit to visible learning. I love the concept that is overarching in this, and it's basically where the meta research is saying that the best learning occurs when the teachers are students. So that means they're learning constantly. And also where we set up environments where the students are teachers as well, so that they have the self-responsibility to take it on themselves. So they focus more on formative assessment than anything else. So they're forming an understanding of their own learning as they go along. Massive merit to it all. I often ask people to consider this. These are 12 of the effects that can make a difference in student learning. If you have the time, spend a few seconds and see if you can work out what you believe are the key effects, perhaps in rank order from number 1 to 4 for the top 4. After you've done that, then have a look at this. They were already in the correct order, and in fact, these are the effect sizes. Now, anything above 0.50 is a pretty strong effect in terms of quality learning. So anything, especially from the reading recovery on, is pretty powerful. Feedback, I believe, would be even stronger than that because feedback, quality feedback given to teachers and students is critical to improvement. Discussion is very important. What we're finding with the brain maps is that when students learn something effectively, it comes from engaging verbally in the particular situation. You must get them talking. However, the big one is student expectations. Basically, if they think they're going to learn well, they're much more likely to be able to do so. And unfortunately, we have the opposite effect. If they have low expectation for themselves, they're less likely to be able to learn. This is why thinking, instruction, and support is so powerful because your thinking predominantly determines how well you can learn. Teach children how to self-talk so that they become aware of their own thinking, so that they watch those messages that they're putting inside their heads all the time. Very important when it comes to quality learning. When teachers want to further their own practice, there are many ways of doing that as well. One quite simply is with self-analysis. That could be the videoing again. It also could be keeping a reflection journal going consistently, perhaps once a week, for 10 minutes sitting down and answering two questions. One is, what am I doing well? What have I done well this week? And the second one is, what could I have done differently? Even if that's just done for 10 minutes at the occasional staff meeting, there is a lot to be said for that self-analysis. Getting feedback from students. I have seen senior physics teachers who finish the last 2 minutes of their lesson by saying, what did I do well here and how could I improve it further? Obviously, it needs a good relationship with the class, though when it works, it's amazing. I get constant feedback from secondary and primary teachers I work with, and it just improves my teaching endlessly. Obviously, how well students perform is feedback in itself. The harsh reality is that If they're going backwards, then you probably need to rethink how you're helping them to learn. Even parent feedback, heaven forbid. Parents often know what's going on because their children go home and talk about it all the time. I saw one guy with a year 8 class who used to appoint a couple of parents for each of his classes, and he would meet with them occasionally and ask for feedback. Now, he wouldn't sit there and cower as they told him just what they wanted done. It was a respectful relationship, and yet it was very powerful for him. And of course, peer coaching from someone else on your staff can be powerful. Someone who perhaps critiques what you're doing after watching you for 10 minutes and you doing vice versa as well. Peer coaching is huge and very much worthwhile putting into place. Part of it with peer coaching and even with taking on your own learning as much as possible is to engage in professional dialogue, to know how to sit with a peer and dialogue in terms of improving your practice. A good skill for that is to learn how to paraphrase. So occasionally, as someone else is talking with you, you might say something like, so you're saying that, and then you tell them more or less what you heard from them. And then they can confirm that and then move on. Within that also is the importance of how we use dialogue in a school. I can tell you now that you will rarely find a school that is passionate about what they do when most people are using small talk. I believe that you can predominantly measure the quality of a school by what is being said in that school every day. If most people, the adults and even the children, are engaging in small talk, it's in trouble. This is where they're complaining a lot. There's a lot of gossip and innuendo and rumor going on. Often people are using either or language where they say either we can do that or we can do that, but we can't do both. That happens often when new curriculum is delivered in a country. People go, I can't do that thinking skill stuff now. I can't afford to be passionate. I haven't got the time. I've just got to get this curriculum done. But it's not either or. It's both and. And often in small talk, I hear people using the word but. They'll start by saying, yes, that's an excellent idea, but. And then from there on, I know that whatever they say is where they don't agree with what's being said. Be careful of the word but. Big talk is just the passionate words. It's looking for solution. It's using both and language. It's talking about what actually would work rather than what wouldn't. Have a close look at the professional dialogue being used in your school, and that will determine predominantly the passion that is there. Focus in on that dialogue. Time for these 3 questions again. Please, if you can spend a few seconds on it, stop and debrief on what I offered in those last few minutes. And so to the next point, the really passionate schools develop resilience at every level in their organization. Obviously, they focus in on the resilience in each person. However, the families also need support to have that strength and thick skin to cope with difficult things in life. The whole school can build up resilience, and I'll talk about some ways of doing that. And also, the full community can have resilience built up. Unfortunately or otherwise, sometimes the best resilience is built up when bad things happen. It is just the way of the human spirit. When things are going well, some of us get complacent and sometimes languish a little in terms of building up our resilience. However, when the lousy things happen, we find out who we really are. And that's where we need to have the strength built up to cope with what's going on. And so while the poor things can happen, a lot of wonderful things can as well. So resilience is basically your ability to bounce back. It's your capacity to cope with the difficult things in life, to have the strength to cope with what's going wrong. There is a lot of research that has been done on resilient adults, and we tend to find that they have these particular characteristics. Definitely the word hope features strongly. Please be careful and keep a careful eye on anyone who ever loses all hope for life, especially teenagers. When teenagers lose hope, some serious things can sometimes occur. So make sure that as much as possible, you are building up hope in people for something better up ahead. Now, those others are fairly self-explanatory, so I can leave you to read those, though generally it's about your interpretation on events in life. When something lousy happens, some people simply go down and they drink more and they complain all the time. And other people go, I'll show them, and they fight back. And it's really important we help you to be one of those latter ones. Part of the resilience scene is learning how to de-stress when difficult things occur. Can I make the point that the word stress is sometimes misinterpreted? Believe it or not, some stress is good for you. In fact, the stress that is good for you is the one called eustress. And this is where you are anxious about something you have to do, such as giving an important talk to a group of people. That, in fact, generally, as long as you keep it under control, improves your performance in that particular event. Distress is another matter. It eats at your soul. When a teacher is distressed about something, they could be waking up consistently at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they are then trying to work out what they're going to do about a particular child. And even hyperstress is worse, and that's when it decimates your everyday life. So you just simply cannot do it properly at all. There are 2 steps to do when you are feeling distressed, when I'm feeling seriously distressed. The first one is to recognize the indicators of that distress. The indicators I'll list in a few minutes. And after the indicators are recognized, you then simply put stress busters into place. Now, the indicators can include things like being badly tired a lot of the time, substance abuse, perhaps food or even just alcohol, very poor sleep, being irritable a lot of the time so that you are snapping at people when in fact it just wasn't warranted. They are the indicators. And then there are the stress busters you can put into place. Now, with teachers, you need to put them into more than just the time during the holidays. It needs to be done every day. Obvious things like some meditation and daily exercise, listening to your favorite music, spending time with great friends, just being present. Blunt questions for you. What have you done so far this year? And be honest with your response. And then what will you do in the rest of the year? Work out what else you could do now to keep your stress busters going as much as possible. When it comes to people facing up to fear and anxiety, keep in mind that there are different perspectives on these. Fear, in fact, is a normal response. In fact, it sometimes keeps you alive, okay, because then you know whether to get out of the way of something and you make sure you're as safe as possible. Anxiety, however, is when that fear is built up out of all proportion to the threat. You might be scared of spiders, but if a tiny, tiny spider goes somewhere near you and you are screaming and shrieking, this would indicate anxiety as compared to fear. Now, in terms of having something to do with about this, there are 3 subcategories to this in terms of how you can respond to it. The physiological and the way that you can determine it, and these are the indicators, is that there is too much arousal too quickly in your body. You can feel the butterflies hitting badly. You maybe get very tense or you're perhaps sleeping badly. Behavioral is when you're doing too much flight or fight. Maybe you're actually freezing up and your brain goes blank so you can't think of anything to say. Maybe you're asking too much for reassurance. The cognitive is when the worry overtakes you. You seriously are having too many negative thoughts and your bias is towards the wrong things all the time. Now, there is anxiety management that we can do with each of these. So, for example, a physiological is when we have a clear awareness of the body cues that tell us that we are becoming anxious, and we then learn how to do active or passive relaxation. Active is to run around somewhere. Passive is to perhaps meditate. Behavioral is when we do things like learn how to be brave and have a go. We work out step plans. We minimize our attention on the anxious behaviors and focusing on positive ones. The cognitive is to be paying attention to our thinking, change the scripts in our heads, be very careful of perfectionism. And the most serious of all, clinical depression, and yet the same concepts apply. Recognize the indicators, and now especially with this one, ask for help. And by the way, that doesn't mean necessarily your best friend, it means someone who will give you good support. And I mean professional support. One of the most effective ways of helping yourself to feel better about something, and keep this in mind with an entire school as well, is to help someone else. In psychology, it's referred to as helper's high. It's that adrenaline surge you receive when you quietly help someone else without necessarily being asked, and you simply feel good because of it. It's one of the best antidotes to ever feeling miserable. I sometimes go past this church with all of its signs out, and I love the different messages that this pastor puts up for people. I love this one especially. Kindness is hard to give away. It keeps coming back. It certainly does. This concept in New Zealand schools has always fascinated me. They call them friendship seats. The essential premise of this is that at least one will be sitting around in a lot of schools. At lunchtime, if children can't find someone to play with, they go and sit on one of these, and automatically a group of students have to come and get them and build them authentically into a game. I think we need to set these up in hotels for adults more often. There would be a lot to be said for doing something like that. Keep in mind also that the best teachers are not necessarily the teachers who just teach best in the classroom. They are the ones who actually support others while they're doing it. That was another example of the sort of energy that builds up when people start to support each other. This is a mini library in Christchurch post earthquake. It's basically an old, large drinks fridge. And the simple rule is take one, leave one. So you just go to it, open it up, find a book you like, and put another one back in that you finish reading. Beautiful example of community connecting and supporting each other. This is a lovely, simple little idea as well. Ask people in a group to write one response in each of those four squares. So if you do it with teachers, they have to write in something they're good at in their personal lives and something they want help with in their personal life. Then do the same with the professional. Now, as you share those around, you'll find all sorts of options in terms of people helping each other. There is a lot to be said for that idea as well. And I come to the last one, the coping with rapid change. There are different interpretations on this one. However, if people do cope well with change, the school is more likely to be one where everyone is learning and taking on new ideas. The first premise on this one is when someone actually wants to change. When someone does indeed want to change, the first line is where they are before even contemplating it. It's just something sitting on the edge of their mind. The second stage is when they do think about it, but they don't do anything with it. Determination is when you do take some initial steps. You set up a bank account for extra savings, but you don't really take the full action. The action is when you fully put it into place. That's when you go to the gym and you do the training. The maintenance, of course, is critical because then you keep it going. The really extreme scene is when you relapse, and that's when you give up or you falter. It's worth looking at why you relapse so you can avoid it at future times. However, another perspective on change is when it is necessary and you indeed do have to do it. Now, when the change is necessary, people tend to go through these particular stages. There are variations on this concept. Others will talk about other steps in it as well, though for the moment I'll sit with this core framework in terms of this. When people have to go through a necessary change, but they're perhaps not that interested initially, you'll find that they are in denial. This often happens in grief as well. We go through the same stages. So with learning, when someone stands at a staff meeting and says, everyone will just need to take on this new computer program, there will be people in the room who don't even hear what you're saying because they're totally in denial. They'll just keep doing their Sudoku or their corrections in the back of the room and just ignoring what's being said. Resistance, though, is where they do realize they have to do it, but they get pretty upset about it. So they resist and they go, why do we have to do this? We've got to spend too much time on this. Adaptation is where they start to put it into place. They're not overjoyed about it, but they make the effort. Involvement is where they fully do get going with it and they put it into place, generally with reasonable spirit. So two blunt questions for you. What would indicate that someone else or even you is in each of the stages? How do you actually know they're in the stages? And once you've worked that out, work out what support you can give to anyone who is in each of those stages. There are some interesting reasons as to why people won't always take on new things. While we could be very much, optimistic and say we'd love to have passionate schools where everyone is perfectly in the right mood for doing everything, the reality is that it's not going to happen. Someone might have a very ill mother and she is really worried about her. Other people just decide that they've had enough of being burnt to a crisp and they would like to balance their lives again. All that notwithstanding, there are different reasons why people won't take on new things. Rightly so, some people are cynical about the worth of some things. Too much is just foisted upon the education system without sometimes thinking through the long-term sustainable changes and options involved with it. So they start to get cynical about anything new that comes through. On occasion, they can feel very threatened by the new things. If it's technology especially, they'll presume that the students know more than them. So they won't be very keen on taking it on sometimes. They've also got pathways in their minds that simply knock anything new. Now, unfortunately, there can be some depression involved with people who do this all the time. They are simply in a habit of responding automatically in a certain way when they see something new. They'll even have their own vernacular for it, like seen it all before, or why really do we have to do this? And the most intriguing one of all, you can sometimes have people who are very good operators who will still be careful about taking on anything else because In the past, when they've offered a really positive contribution, they're the first person who is asked to do further work because they're the path of least resistance to the leaders. So after a while, people sometimes decide not to say yes to everything. So there we go in terms of 5 different perspectives on creating a passionate school. I mentioned these 4 questions back at the start. Please, if you have the time, can you now address those 4 questions? What could you do with some of this? Come up with some different conjecture. Maybe decide on 5 different ones that most did it for you, then cut it down to 3. Then from there, work out what you will do with these. Will you share them with someone else? Will you put different things into place? What will you do? At least one, please, as a result of listening to this. Then how and when will you do this? That's the attention to detail. What time? Is there any expense involved? Who else will you need involved? And how are you going to keep this going? What sort of thing are you going to do to make sure that you are keeping this sustained? Just remember, a lot of good things happen in schools. We need to reinforce them as much as possible. And I have to tell you, this profession, amongst any other on the planet, gives you the most amazing opportunity to make a profound difference in terms of what you do. I wrote a book once called The Ripple Effect. And as I was writing it, I was interviewing hundreds of teachers and querying what they knew about what difference they'd made in students' lives. And I heard many different amazing stories from teachers who'd met a former student in a shopping centre 15 years later and discovered that one single conversation back in the student's early days changed that child's life. I assure you that in this profession, you make a profound difference with what you do. In Strawberry Fields in New York's Central Park, you will find this small area set aside in memory of John Lennon. And there is this beautiful mosaic there. There are thousands of tiny mosaic tiles in this, forming into the middle where it has the word imagine. This is a big mosaic, and you can see the feet of the person behind there to give you some indication on that size. I'm after schools that have a no limits culture because when they have that, they'll have the passion and vice versa. Just imagine how our schools would be every day if everyone was inspired about being there. I want everyone who works in a school to wake up in the morning and think, imagine what I could get done today. And if that happens, we'll have those passionate schools. I thank you very much for your time, and I wish you every success in generating that passion in your own life and your own school. Thank you.